Golly, this place sure is creepy at night.
It's even creepy during the day.
I think we better split up. Daphne and I'll go this way. You two go that way. And Scooby, stand guard.
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to an all-new installment of a podcast named ScoobyDoo Extra. I'd like to welcome any regular listeners back to the program, and if you're new to the show or just unfamiliar with the extra format, essentially, this is my added value content show. This is where I like to do commentaries, reviews, and conversations that are tied to releases of Scooby films, series, or events. Today's episode is no exception, as I had the opportunity to chat with Stephanie Eddleman, who is an exhibit developer and working at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, put together with her team the Scooby-Doo Mansion Mayhem exhibit, which debuted in June of 2022 and closed in January of 2023. With the exhibit, guests are invited to work along with Mystery Incorporated to solve the case of the jewel-themed ghost. Essentially, upon entering the exhibit, guests are encouraged to observe, ask questions, and interpret clues to help the gang crack the case. As previously stated, the exhibit closed at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis on January 8th, but it did move on to Dearborn, Michigan, where it was just a few days from closing out its run at the time that I had my conversation with Stephanie. But at time of recording, it is April 18th, and just a few days out from the exhibit launching in Waco, Texas. Some of the references made during the conversation, we will talk about the Dearborn exhibit as though it is still existing and ongoing. So just wanted to give people kind of like a timeline. And I mean, depending on when you're listening to this episode, it may not make a difference, but at time of recording, that's where we all stand. I had a lot of fun chatting with Stephanie. I had a lot of curiosity and questions about the show. It's not something that I was able to attend myself, at least not yet. It's not scheduled to appear anywhere in Canada so far, up until sort of the end of its run in 2025, it's looking like. But fingers crossed it'll come close enough that I will get an opportunity. In the meantime, Stephanie answered all my questions, gave a whole lot of insight into how they developed the exhibit, what kind of work goes into putting it together conceptually, geographically, and physically, as well as talking a little bit about the future of the exhibit as it is traveling across the United States, and some new projects that Stephanie is currently at work on and excited about for the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. If you've had an opportunity to see the exhibit, I hope this conversation gives you some insight into the behind-the-scenes machinations of putting a show like this together. And if you have not yet had the chance to check one of these out and you're within the area of Waco, Texas, April 22nd is the launch date, and if what you hear in my conversation with Stephanie gets you intrigued or excited about the show, I would seriously encourage going and checking it out, if at all possible. With that, I will wind this intro down and let you all get to the conversation proper. Wherever you are, kick back, relax, and I hope you enjoy my chat with exhibit developer Stephanie Eddleman. We'll see you on the other side. My guest today has been a museum professional for over a decade and has been working with the Children's Museum of Indianapolis developing interactive exhibits since 2019. In June of 2022, Scooby-Doo fans got to see the culmination of over 2 years of hard work with the debut of the Scooby-Doo Mansion Mayhem exhibit, which ran until January of 2023 and has proved popular enough to start a tour of different museums and venues throughout the United States. At time of recording, it currently resides at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, at least for a couple more weeks, and will be moving shortly to the Mayborn Museum Complex in Waco, Texas, opening there on April 22nd. The show also has 5 more confirmed stops, taking it through the summer of 2025. I'd like everyone to join me in welcoming to the show, Stephanie Eddleman. How are you doing, Stephanie?
I'm great. Thanks. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you here. Since hearing about this exhibit, I've been like, I myself I have an art history degree. I have an archivist mentality. So I was like, Scooby-Doo exhibit. Of course, it's not anywhere in Canada, but
Who knows? There's still some open spots on the tour. So
fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
yeah.
So getting into the conversation, I just want to establish your Scooby bona fides. What is your kind of background with Scooby, and how did that draw you into developing an exhibit for the Children's Museum?
Sure. So, thinking back to when I was a kid, and Scooby-Doo has been around for a really long time. If I think about my memories of Scooby-Doo, the one that stand out the most to me are actually the live action movies that came out sometime in like the early 2000s. So starring Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar and Matthew Lillard as Shaggy. I just remember going to see those movies in the theater and thinking they were just kind of really silly and funny. And I watched some episodes of the cartoon, not a ton, but it was, a show that was just kind of fun. And, I knew it was around, I knew it was out there. And I had some friends that were loved the show and watched some of the cartoons. A pup named Scooby-Doo, I think, was out on the airwaves around the time that, I was growing up. So I had some people that were familiar with that particular version of the show. And
that shows an entry point for a lot of people right now.
Yes, a pup named Scooby-Doo.
It's that age group. When you say what you're kind of Scooby focus in, when you start zeroing in, it really kind of dates you whether you want it to or not, because you can you can be like, oh, that show came out in 72 or that show came out in 87.
Yes, exactly. Well, now that I've dated myself, so then, kind of fast forwarding. So I work at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis as an exhibit developer. And the museum itself has had a partnership with Warner Brothers before we did the Scooby-Doo exhibit. So the museum actually worked with Warner Brothers on an exhibit about DC superheroes. It was called DC Superheroes Discover Your Superpower. And it was a really great, successful show. And WB was so happy with how it turned out. And so they actually offered to the museum and said, hey, would you want to do another exhibit with us about, Scooby-Doo? And the museum was super excited because, of course, Scooby-Doo has been around for a super long time, over 50 years. And it's a great opportunity for that kind of intergenerational family learning and memory making that we love to promote at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. So it seemed like a perfect fit. We actually have 3 different exhibit developers at the museum. So when we were looking at the projects coming up and kind of making our assignments, I thought, Scooby-Doo, that could be really fun. And my son was at the time, back in 2019, when we started the project, he was about 2.5, he was almost 3. And I thought this could be a really fun project. I could see him getting into it or watching some of the episodes with him. And so when I got assigned the project, I started going back. I was watching the first and the second season, the original show, and some of the newer versions like Scooby-Doo, Mystery Incorporated and Scooby-Doo Guess Who and the new Scoob movie. And I got to watch all of those with my son, and he just, kind of fell in love with the show. And he got excited. It was something we could do together. He started playing with all the toys and he became a huge Scooby fan. So in the end, it was not only a wonderful project to work on at work, but it was something that, we could do together as a family too.
Sounds kind of like maybe Warner Brothers was planning this from the beginning, the indoctrination of the youth.
Yes.
So Warner Brothers approached the Children's Museum for the DC project, or that was something that you guys were approaching them for?
So those projects, we have a lot of different partners, IP partners, so intellectual property partners that we've worked, years and years on creating relationships with these different partners and brands to kind of help bring their stories to life. So prior to DC Superheroes, we had done projects with some other properties like Disney Junior and Nickelodeon. And our director of traveling exhibits, Sarah Myers, who I think you've talked to a little bit over email, she is the person in our museum that really helps grow those relationships and, make the connections. And so Warner Brothers, I know we had been talking to them for quite some time, just seeing, where their brand aligned with what the museum was doing. And so it kind of, conversations over time kind of developed, and I think we kind of came to a mutual agreement to kind of work on the DC project together.
Nice. The fact that they followed the DC project with Scooby-Doo, considering the climate right now, kind of in fandom with so many projects being shelved at the moment and so little Scooby content out there, it's kind of nice to see that like that was sort of the number 2 IP that they kind of wanted to present and develop.
Yeah.
So yay, Scooby.
Yes, yay, Scooby. It has that lasting appeal.
So for anyone who doesn't know, could you give a little background, kind of an elevator pitch for the Children's Museum?
Sure. So the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is located in Indianapolis, Indiana, so right in the heart of the Midwest. And we are actually the world's largest children's museum in the world. So our campus is over 450,000 square feet. We have a building with 5 floors, an outdoor sports legends park where you can sample 12 different sports. And we have partnerships with a lot of our local teams like the Indiana Pacers and the Indianapolis Colts. And the mission of the Children's Museum is to create extraordinary experiences across the arts, sciences, and humanities that have the power to transform the lives of children and families. And so one thing that sets our museum apart from some other children's museums is that focus on family. We want to create experiences that allow the whole family to come to play together, to talk about what they're seeing together, to have conversations, and kind of spark that nugget of family learning for everyone who comes through our doors. Another thing that sets us apart is that we are a collecting institution. So most children's museums don't collect objects or have their own collection. We do have our own collection that houses, I hope I'm not going to mess this up, like 300,000 objects. So we have a huge collection. And we display those collections pieces in our exhibits. And it also sometimes allows us to get loans from other collecting institutions to show off their wonderful memorabilia, historic artifacts when we put on exhibitions.
Hence the name museum.
Yes.
What kind of artifacts and whatnot collections do you maintain there?
Oh my gosh, all kinds of things. So we have like an arts and humanities collection, which has everything from dolls and toys and different things from around the world. So, toys from different cultures. We have a huge natural sciences collection, which includes dinosaur bones and other, like taxidermied animals and shells and rocks. So natural sciences, but by far, we're pretty well known for our paleontology collection. One of our exhibits, Dinosphere, is one of the largest displays of juvenile dinosaur bones.
Nice.
We have our own paleontology team that actually goes out and digs up the bones and then preps them and gets them ready to go out on display. So it kind of runs the gamut. I mean, if you go down in our collection storage, I feel like every time I'm down there with our curators, you walk by something new every time. Like sometimes it's like, a Barbie from super long time ago, or like the original Barbie. And then sometimes, it's like a random like baby crib or something from the 18th century. I mean, there's just all kinds of cool stuff that we haven't.
So as a developer, is that something, I'm assuming you probably have sort of a schedule over the course of the year where you're like, we have this many openings for this much time and whatever. Obviously, you have outside vendors who come to you who want you to develop something for their IP, but obviously you also have this collection. So as a developer, do you just kind of like go down there and just look around and be like, what can I create out of this? What are some themes? What can I do with it?
That's a great question. So the Children's Museum, we're pretty large. We have a staff of over 300 people. And so my job as a developer is to help kind of shape the content, the educational content, the messaging, the storyline for an exhibit, and kind of, get the team thinking creatively about how we can tell those stories. And the kind of tools that we use to tell those stories are things like labels, which you can read on the wall, interactives where you can actually be physically doing, manipulating something or participating in an activity in the exhibit. And of course, objects, because objects are a great tool in telling stories. And so many times the museum will kind of come up with ideas for exhibits in a couple of different ways. One is through partnerships, like Scooby-Doo was a partnership with Warner Brothers. Sometimes an exhibit will revolve around a really really powerful object or group of objects. An example of that would be we had the opportunity to work with China on bringing the terracotta warriors over to the US and do a show on the terracotta warriors. So sometimes it's a group of objects, and sometimes the ideas come from our visitors. We'll do topic testing with our members or people that are visiting the museum and kind of find out, what are you interested in learning about? What would be an exhibit that your family would enjoy coming to? So an example of one of those is we did some topic testing and we found out that circus was a huge theme that people were really interested in, learning more about. And so we did a whole exhibit called Circus Starring You. That was about kind of not only the history of the circus, but like you becoming a part of the show as well. So they kind of come from those different places. And we usually start with that messaging first, kind of, what do we want people to learn, or how do we want their attitudes to shift after coming out of an exhibit, or what skills do we want them to develop? And then I'll actually work with a curator. So we have a couple of curators that, oversee the collection, take care of the objects. They know the ins and outs of every single piece that we have down there. And as developer, I'll work with them to kind of figure out, what do we have in our collection that's going to help tell this story and make it come to life for people.
Perfect. I'm curious, I wanted to ask, how does one become an exhibit developer? I know from looking at your bio, you have an anthropology degree. I'm not sure. I mean, I can kind of see how that ties in, but I'm not sure if that's maybe the traditional way that one moves into that field. I'm curious, what if somebody was kind of listening to this and thinking, that actually sounds really cool, and I'm looking for a major, how does one move into that?
I would say, I think everybody who winds up in exhibits has a random story about how they got there. It's really twisty, turny. I don't know if there's any one conventional way to get there, but I will say that something that really kind of helped me and got me to where I am is, after college, I had a degree in anthropology, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with that degree. It was okay, now what? What kind of job am I going to get? And so I started, thinking about, anthropology is a lot about the study of humans and human culture. And so I started volunteering at some museums, because that seemed kind of like a fit, or it seemed interesting to me. And I'd grown up going to museums, and I realized that I really enjoyed that kind of work. And I found that there were graduate degree programs in museum studies. So I know there are quite a few in the US. I'm not sure how many there are in Canada, but in the US, there are some graduate degree programs. And so I applied and got accepted to one in Indianapolis. It's at a school called IUPUI, which is Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. That's a mouthful. It's long. And I went to graduate school thinking I was going to work specifically with collections, with objects, because that's kind of what I've been drawn to during my volunteer work. But as I completed the program, I learned a lot about kind of the theory behind museum education and how people learn through museums and the kinds of experiences that museums can provide that are so different from traditional classroom education. And it just got me really excited thinking about the kinds of experiences that could be created. And this exhibit development position was such a perfect kind of combination of education and learning, but creativity and getting to tell stories and, work with teams to make these kind of larger than life ideas actually be physically built in a space. And so that was kind of always my goal as I graduated from the program, was to get into a position in exhibit development. And I worked over 8 years, just really being kind of on the front lines. I worked, with the public, doing programming, writing programming, developing programming, training, other staff, until I finally kind of moved into this position. So it was definitely a journey. It went a couple of different places, but I'm super excited that I get to be in this position now. And it's a really fun, creative, rewarding job.
Fair enough. From hearing you talk about it in other places and online and whatnot, I mean, it definitely seems to be something you enjoy.
Yes.
So Warner Brothers comes to you and says, let's do a Scooby-Doo exhibit. You get assigned the task of brainstorming that or starting the process of putting that together. What is that original germ, that original seed that you start with in order to get that ball rolling?
Yeah. So the first thing that we do with any exhibit project, but same with Scooby-Doo, we do a lot of brainstorming. And the brainstorming happens in a couple of different places. Number one, when we're working with a partner, we brainstorm with the partners. So we brainstorm with, WB, especially the people that, are tied into that franchise and that specific property. We also do brainstorms with staff throughout our museum, that have different specialties and backgrounds. So we have people that do 3D design, people that do 2D design and graphic design, people that have a background in production and, build the exhibits, educators, floor staff. And whenever we lead a brainstorm, or whenever I lead a brainstorm, trying to just pull out themes. So, let's think about Scooby-Doo. What memories do you have of Scooby-Doo? What do you think makes it so popular? Why does it have such staying power? And we do all of this brainstorming to try to, really figure out what is it that draws people to that brand? What gets them excited about it? What's going to be memorable? What do we want them to walk away with? And so that kind of started the seed of the idea for what the Scooby-Doo exhibit would be about. And I had to pull this up. I'm gonna read it because it's been a while since I wrote this, but it kind of culminates in the team creating something that we call a big idea. And the big idea is kind of this big overarching message that we hope everyone kind of walks away with a piece of when they leave the exhibit. So for Scooby-Doo, our big idea was that for over 5 decades, the members of Mystery Inc. have shown that through courage, teamwork, and ingenuity, even the toughest mysteries can be solved. And so for our team, we were hoping that, if a family comes to visit this exhibit and they walk out and we say, what do you think that exhibit was about? We hope that they would say something about, about teamwork, or about problem solving, about, finding out the source of a mystery, about using ingenuity to kind of work through a problem. We hope that they would say something that kind of harkens back to that big idea that we wrote at the beginning.
I think mystery is a theme or an idea that if you ask just about anybody, what do you think is a concept in Scooby-Doo, mystery would probably come up. I mean, it's literally in the name of Mystery Incorporated. However, mystery implies the unknown or the unseen. So when you're trying to put together an exhibit, how do you approach that where you're like, let's do a mystery?
Yeah.
How do we do a mystery?
How do we do a mystery? And it's even, this was our biggest challenge with the exhibit, was figuring out how we're going to tell a mystery in a specific way. So at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, the way that we set up our exhibits, we call it free choice learning. And so when a family walks into an exhibit, we don't necessarily want to give them a specific path that they have to follow, go to point A, B, C, D, E, then leave and you're done. We really want people to be able to walk in, see what draws their attention, go to that area, explore. Maybe they go to the other areas, maybe they don't, but it's kind of up to them, right? Pursuing their own interests. And so that even added another layer of difficulty. How do you tell a mystery, or how do you solve a mystery when people don't have to go, they don't have to find certain clues in order, and they can kind of go all over the place. And
a nonlinear mystery.
Yes, a nonlinear mystery. And so the way that we tackled that, the way that we kind of felt we could break that down into bite-sized chunks, was looking at the Mystery Inc. team. And, we have these 5 key characters. And what does Fred say at the beginning of every episode? Like, let's split up, gang, and look for clues. So let's, have each of the gang members kind of split up, and they each get kind of a section or a portion of this mystery in an area that kind of relates to them. So we kept Scooby and Shaggy together because they're always together. And, they go to, if we're, we started thinking about, well, where would they go? What do they like to do? Well, food, right? So, okay, maybe they're in like a kitchen. And what's Fred doing? Well, he loves to tinker. He loves to build traps. Maybe he's found some kind of tinkering workshop that he is investigating in. Velma, she's really searching for clues. Maybe she goes to some kind of library. So as these ideas started to kind of concept themselves out, it kind of started to come to us, well, maybe they're in like a mansion, and there's all these different rooms of the mansion that they've gone to look for clues. And so that's kind of how we started to solidify this idea that there was going to be a mansion, there was going to be a mystery, and the gang had split up to go kind of figure out different parts of the mystery. And you're called upon to join them and, enter the mansion and help them search for clues and help them solve the mystery. So then to kind of figure out how to get people who might not go to every area to still feel like they were helping, we knew that each kind of interactive component in and of itself had to feel rewarding and you had to feel some amount of success, even if you were just, doing one thing. So I'll give you an example. In Velma's area, there's a pipe organ, and you have to play a certain progression of keys in the correct order. And if you play it correctly, you open a secret panel on the pipe organ, and there's something hidden inside. I won't give away what it is. There's something hidden inside, but you discover something inside of the pipe organ. So if that was all you were to do, you would still feel this sense of accomplishment, like, oh, I played all the notes correctly and I found this secret compartment, and I found something inside of the pipe organ. But then, if you keep going to the other areas, if you try out all the interactives, everything ties together to tell one complete story. So the clues layer on top of each other. You get new pieces of information. And so if you really want to solve the mystery, when you walk into the exhibit, there's a big panel that says they're investigating a jewel thieving ghost. Help them figure out, kind of who done it. Why did they do it? If you really want to put together all of those clues, you can, and you can actually get to an answer at the end of, who's under the mask when, Fred pulls it off.
Does it make it harder or easier going into it knowing that it's going to be an interactive mystery? I could see it almost being a little bit easier just thinking in terms of, what I said about the unknown or the unseen, where it's like, well, it's interactive, so there's going to be some hands-on, but then you also have to think of what those hands-on things are going to be, and you have to think of the age group of the people that you're targeting, your demographic. So did that make it easier or harder or both?
I think depending on the person you ask, they could say easier or harder. For me and my job at the museum, that's what we do with all of our exhibits. Every single one of our exhibits is hands-on. Every single one of our exhibits has things that we want people to physically do, to manipulate, to feel like they're taking an active role in their learning and in their participation in an exhibit. So for me, it's always an exciting challenge, and I really, love doing it. But you do kind of have to set some parameters for yourself so it doesn't get too, way out of control. So we usually set a target age range. This exhibit's target age range is kids ages 5 to 8. So the majority of the stuff that we're developing to be in that exhibit, hopefully, a 5 to 8-year-old could kind of complete that either on their own or with the help of their adults. Now, we know that not just 5 to 8-year-olds are going to go to the Scooby-Doo Mansion Mayhem exhibit. So, we have to tuck some things in there for other age groups too. So for example, the kitchen area has a lot of pretend play with food. You can make Scooby and Shaggy a super tall sandwich or a pizza with potato chips and pickles on top of it. And you can, just kind of play around and pretend like you're either making a snack for Scooby or for, your mom or dad or aunt or uncle, whoever's with you that day. And then on the kind of other end of the spectrum, we knew that we might have some all adult groups that were interested in coming to the exhibit and exploring. So thinking about how we can weave in those moments of, memorabilia, the history of Scooby-Doo, what kind of artifacts might they be interested in seeing, or might kind of, spark something, a conversation that they, want to dive into, or something they might not have known about Scooby-Doo. So it's not easy, but it's that balancing act of trying to, really hone in on a specific age group, but making sure we're throwing little things in for other groups that might be coming to visit as well.
Was the 5 to 8 age group something that was not dictated, but suggested by Warner Brothers, or was that something that fell in line kind of more with sort of the age group that the Children's Museum kind of tends to service, or where did that come from, that number?
Yeah, so it was kind of a collaboration, I would say, between us and Warner Brothers. They kind of share with us who they're kind of looking to target and who their biggest fan base is. And so, that 5 to 8 range seemed to kind of line up with where they were hoping to kind of take the brand as it moves forward into the future. But it also aligns really well with what our museum, like the kind of age group that we see at the museum as well. So typically at the museum, we have, our preschool aged kids that are kind of 3 to 5. And we knew that Scooby-Doo was maybe a little bit older than that preschool age range. Not that they wouldn't come and enjoy it, but there can be some spooky moments within Scooby-Doo, and we didn't want to shy away from that. We wanted to have that element of mystery and spookiness. So that 5 to 8 age range felt like it was really great that they would engage with the content. We could, be true to the brand and kind of the mystery behind it, and also just create a really fun interactive experience that not only lets people enter the world of Scooby-Doo, but it kind of teaches them some skills along the way, like problem solving, making an observation, and then, using that observation to help you answer a question or solve a problem. And so kind of sneakily, the kids are learning things along the way, even though they might not realize it. They're gaining some really great critical thinking skills.
I was actually editing another one of my conversations just the other day, and my guest for that episode was talking about his daughter, who was, I believe, 5 or 6, and she was interested in Scooby-Doo. He said she had nightmares every night, but she wouldn't stop watching Scooby-Doo. And when he asked her, what was it about Scooby-Doo that she enjoyed, she's like, it's scary, but not too scary.
Yes.
So knowing that we were going to be talking and hearing that, and knowing the age group that was kind of being targeted, I was kind of wondering, particularly with the kind of old school Scooby, which did rely a little bit more on ghosts and mysteries and whatnot. It did have a little bit more of a creepy vibe to it. How much of that did you feel comfortable bringing in? How much do you feel is baked into the DNA of it and that you couldn't just like ignore it? And where was kind of like WB's stance on scaring young kids?
Yeah. Well, I think, all along what we said when we developed this exhibit was we kept saying like spooky, not scary. So that was kind of
That's
like
a good phrase.
Yeah. So it was spooky, but not scary. And, I think we were all kind of on the same page, the Children's Museum and WB, just like this is part of the brand, they investigate mysteries, but usually it's, it's not really a ghost, right? It's like, somebody that's dressed up or that's using an illusion to make it seem like something spooky is there, but it's not really there. And so part of the messaging of the exhibit was, yes, sometimes we have to face spooky things in our lives, but your friends, your teammates, your family, they can give you the courage to kind of overcome the thing that's maybe a little bit spooky so that you can, seek the source of the mystery. And so part of it was about debunking some of that spookiness. There's a really fun interactive in the exhibit. It's in Daphne's area, which is the Hall of Portraits. And you can actually go behind one of the walls and you kind of get to put yourself in the villain's shoes. And so there's different buttons you can push and levers you can pull to make an evil laugh sound, or turn on the knights. One of the suit of armor knights has like red eyes and you can make the eyes glow. You can make a little ghost project down onto the ground. So it's kind of like debunking, like, hey, this isn't really a ghost. It's somebody that's just using illusions to kind of spook people and maybe throw them off the trail. And you can kind of put yourself into that person's shoes, which hopefully helps kind of debunk some of that mystery and spookiness that might make kids feel a little bit afraid.
I never really thought about that, but like, yes, there is always the unmasking at the end of the episode, but to actually be hands-on the solving of that mystery and the air quote unmasking might actually even do more to like empower a young kid who might find stuff spooky.
Yeah. And
they were actually like there.
Especially when your family's by your side, right? Or your teammates, your friends are there with you. It's like, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to do it by yourself. It's important that you kind of rely on those around you to help give you that courage and lift you up.
So clearly you work closely with WB putting this together or developing the idea. Is there any point where they just go, yeah, okay, we sign off on this, go?
So there's multiple checkpoints along, the whole process of the exhibit, and they're kind of with us the whole way through, but we're constantly checking in. So we have our concept phase where we're like, okay, here's kind of what we're thinking, what the environments might kind of look like, how the characters will be involved. They'll review that and make sure that it's kind of right on track and, they don't have any other feedback and kind of check off on that point. Then we'll go into more of our schematic and detail design where our designers are really figuring out what are these structures going to look like? All of these interactives that I'm talking about, how are we going to build those? Like, what electronics do we need? What mechanical parts and pieces are going to all come together to help build these out in the real world? And so we kind of, put all those drawings together, figure out, how things are going to be painted, what the lighting is going to look like, kind of send that package back and check in again and say, hey, is this still on the right path? Are we in sync? Are we lining up? And then, they give us the another check of approval saying, yep, this all sounds good. All the way up to, when the exhibit is being built and being installed, This was kind of at the tail end of COVID that we were starting to build and install things. So we did a lot of Zoom meetings and Teams meetings. I actually remember one of the people from WB, we were kind of like, wheeling him around on a little laptop. Like he was on the laptop, we were wheeling him around the exhibit, like, oh, and look over here. Here's what we did. This is what this area looks like. We can move you closer here, pull you back. And so they kind of
virtual tour.
Yeah, a virtual tour. They got to kind of, check it out and just make sure that everything was kind of coming together right and was staying true to the brand and, matching the Scooby world look and feel. But I will say that Warner Brothers was like such a wonderful partner to work with because, they know the brand, they know Scooby-Doo the best, but they were really gracious and knew that we know how to do things for children and families. Like that's kind of our expertise and how to tell those stories in a way that's appropriate for that age group. So they gave us just a lot of flexibility and trust and really let us kind of take the creative reins in a lot of instances. And so it was really fun. I've said this a couple of times to people I worked with. I kind of felt like I got to write a Scooby-Doo episode, like a live action Scooby-Doo episode, as we were putting this exhibit together, which was just, really amazing. And we were so grateful that they were so supportive.
To be fair, you did have the actual voice actors speak your dialogue. So that's canon, baby.
Yes, it's true.
So you have your story, you have your mystery, you've got WB watching your back, helping you through the whole thing. Now you're at the phase where, you mentioned having to actually build things, to have to actually manifest all of these ideas, which probably looked great on paper, but now it has to become real. How do you go about fabricating these things? I mean, looking at the exhibit online, the sconces, the moldings, the bookshelves, this is all pretty much made from scratch, is it not?
Yes, yeah, it's all made from scratch. So nothing existed before we built this exhibit. And really that's where the part of our creative team, our design team, really, I feel like shined in this exhibit because they, our designer, our 3D designer, Craig Wetley, he was studying background paintings of old episodes, just looking at the different colors they use, the type of fixtures that were on the wall, just kind of even the way the cobwebs are draped over things and, really using that as inspiration as we took things into the real world.
That's definitely a vibe that I got looking at the images because I was like, somebody was looking at episodes to do this.
Oh, yes. I think it's I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his last name right. Paraguay. He was one of the original background artists for Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful paintings.
Yes, those beautiful paintings. I mean, those were kind of pinned up all over our we have a workroom where we kind of do brainstorming things. Those were pinned up, colors circled, patterns zoomed in on and blown up really big. And so our design team, I think, just knocked it out of the park thinking about how are we going to kind of replicate that style in a physical build. And then the actual building of the exhibit, for this exhibit, it was kind of a combination of both some out-of-house production. They built a lot of the wall structures and a lot of just kind of the overall bigger units. And then our internal production team really was the one to bring those interactives to life, to figure out, how are we going to make this control panel that when you push all these buttons, all these different things happen. And how are we going to make a trap where you can crank a lever and turn a wheel and make a weight raise up and make a punching glove come back and then, activate it just like Fred would set a trap. So our internal team did so much work on kind of bringing those interactive portions, figuring out how those were going to be designed and built. And then at the very end, it's just a lot of people coming together. We had scenic painters that were doing all of the, the painting on the different surfaces, and even myself and the designers, just going in there, pinning things up on notice boards, making sure it kind of, looks just right, making changes, doing a lot of kind of looking around at different antique stores around town and seeing what we could kind of get from there that would help add to the ambiance. So it was definitely a huge team effort, a lot of people kind of coming together to get that final product ready.
I was just wondering, looking again at like the moldings and stuff that you had on the wall, and are these being fabricated outside? Or are you guys like making them in-house?
So the moldings and things like that were fabricated out of house for this project. We had a team kind of doing, like I said, like the wall builds, the molding, kind of those big elements that you see. But that's not to say that our internal team can't do those types of things. So we have a production staff. We have a big footprint in our basement where we build our own kind of components for exhibits. It all for them just comes down to like, a joke, we only have so many people. We do so many exhibits a year. There's only so many things they can build. So it just kind of comes down to that juggling act of what they have time to do. And when we have to make choices, we usually rely on our internal team for those really interactive elements, because they have specialty in figuring out how to make things that, millions of children aren't going to break after, banging on it or manipulating it over and over and over again, that, we just can't replicate with people that are from out of house. So when we have to make a choice, they really, focus on those interactive elements. They can make them robust and get them to work so that they work over and over and over again until, Scooby is traveling in 2025 at some, venue down the road.
Yeah.
It's still working the way we want it to work. And so that's kind of how we split this project up. But our in-house team they could have made the molding too, if they had the time in their schedule.
I used to work for a theater company many years ago, and just watching the process of like building the sets for every show and sort of the thought and the effort and what they were going to manage in-house and outsource and whatever. So that was just very much the feeling that I got kind of looking at all of the kind of displays in the exhibit, and my brain just instantly was like, how much were they able to do themselves? And also like, because those moldings also just very much have like a cartoony vibe to it. And there's a verisimilitude to everything, but it's also just extra. Yeah. So anyways, so how long does that all take, manufacturing the exhibit?
Oh man. So the whole process, I'm going to break this down so I can kind of think about it in my mind, how long it took. So the whole entire exhibit development process for this project took about 2.5 years. And I would say like that first year and a half was really more like things on paper, like, the concepting, the ideas, going back and forth, figuring out kind of like, what things are going to look like, doing the drawings, getting those all set. And then I would say that second year, that last year, was all kind of the production, like the physical building of the different pieces of, the different interactive components, the wall units. So I would say about a year's worth of time probably went into the actual physical build.
And would you say that's a relatively normal amount of time for both of those sides of the project?
I would say that is an ideal amount of time. If that is, this project definitely had a really great timeline, and we had, when we have timelines like that, those kind of ideal timelines, I think it just allows us to be really innovative and creative and try things that maybe we haven't done before, and experiment, because we have enough time then in the process where if something doesn't quite work out the way we think it's going to, there's still time to change it or kind of make it a little bit different. So if I could have 2.5 years from start to finish for all of my projects, that would make me very, very happy.
Was that extended somewhat because of COVID, or was that just what WB was willing to work with?
I think definitely. So when we started the project in 2019, I'm not sure we had a hard opening date. And I would say definitely probably because of the pandemic, things went a little bit slower. Everybody was working from home. We were trying to do brainstorms online through Microsoft Teams, through Zoom, which, was very different for us. I would say before the pandemic at the museum, we pretty much exclusively worked only in person, right? We were very used to like all being in a room together and brainstorming things out on a whiteboard. So we had to learn a couple of different, tips and tools and tricks to get us through the pandemic, and kind of conduct our, kind of concept and ideation online. And I think we've come out stronger for it because now we have a lot more tools at our disposal that we can use. But because of that kind of learning curve, I think things maybe went a little bit slower, but it all worked out in the end. And it ended up being a perfect amount of time to just create such a cool end product.
So you've got roughly 2.5 years from, hey, do you want to do this, to doors are open. How do you maintain your excitement for that span of time on a single exhibit?
Well,
Because
part of
it's
it
a
is
long
that
time when you think about it.
it is a long time. You're right. It is a long time. Part of it is that it wasn't the only project I was working on. So I was
Okay.
working on Scooby-Doo, but I was working on, I think between 2019 and 2022, I probably opened an additional 3 or 4 other projects. So, there's other projects that are balancing things out
You
that,
had other
are kind of
outlets.
ebbing and flowing and kind of, keeping my brain thinking about different things. But I think part of what keeps me excited about it is I get to do a lot of the testing, the prototyping, talking to our visitors about what's coming, getting their feedback, even using like kind of my kids as test subjects sometimes, like, hey, what do you think if we, made a bookshelf where you could pull a book and you could, discover something inside. So part of it for me is talking to the people that are ultimately going to consume the product and seeing the excitement that they get, and seeing, kind of the reactions they have when we're, prototyping a certain interactive element, or seeing kids' faces light up when they hear we have an exhibit about Scooby-Doo coming, and kind of, taking that energy and then kind of channeling it into my own work. Because ultimately what I really love to do is I love creating exhibits for kids and families. And that's like the most rewarding moment for me, is actually when it's open, seeing people come through and interact and have fun and make those memories together. And so that's kind of what keeps me going.
How has the reaction been? Like, what's the feedback you've been kind of personally getting?
Everyone that I've talked to has just really loved it. I've heard a lot of people say that it feels like they're walking into a Scooby-Doo episode, which is like the ultimate compliment. Like the fact that we can make you feel like you're in another place, that you've kind of, left the real world and gone into this fun Scooby-Doo mystery world, is amazing. And I really feel like we've gotten a lot of positive feedback just about the amount of stuff there really is for kids to do and to discover within the exhibit. So, that has been a great, kind of reception, is that, hey, this exhibit is so interactive and so fun and so hands-on. And then last but not least, I think hearing from some of our adult visitors, or people that are even coming without kids, hearing them get excited about some of the artifacts and memorabilia that we had on display. So not all of this is traveling with the exhibit, but when the exhibit was at the Children's Museum for its debut, we had a screen-used mystery machine that was at the entrance of the exhibit. And then we had some original artwork from WB Archives, and it was really cool to kind of have some of those, first pitch boards or first character concepts, and hearing how excited some of the adult audiences, kind of were upon seeing those, and thinking about the history that was another part of what I really loved hearing people talk about after their experience.
Was there anything, when you started digging into the lore, I guess, to come up with your story, come up with your concept, was there anything in particular that surprised you or was kind of an exciting discovery? And was there anything that maybe WB wanted to focus on with the property that maybe you didn't expect?
So one of the things that came out, and I kind of knew it was a thing, but I didn't know the extent. So ScrappyDoo is a really polarizing character. Like, I remember there being internal debate about whether ScrappyDoo should make an appearance in the exhibit or not. And like, if he did, where he would be and how he would, talk about him. So I remember we decided, we kind of landed on, we'll do a case of ScrappyDoo memorabilia. And it's kind of like a, you either love him or you hate him, kind of display. And you can make of this display what you want. So that's maybe just one funny thing. That was something I discovered along the way. I think another thing that was maybe surprising to me, but was really cool, the way I think we kind of went in the end. So, Scooby-Doo's been around for so long that there's been so many different kind of like changes in animation style and kind of the tone of the show. And so when we were figuring out what direction we were going to go in, I kind of had just assumed that Warner Brothers would be really into like the newest kind of look, right? I think Scoob had kind of came out not too long ago, or it was, it was like 2021 maybe that it came out. And I think I had just kind of assumed like, oh, well, they're going to want to go with that kind of look and feel, since that's like the newest thing, the newest kind of look of the brand that's coming out. But we as a team are really drawn to that kind of old school original look of the cartoon, just because, again, thinking about intergenerational family memory making, grandparents who watch Scooby-Doo, parents who watch Scooby-Doo, they might be kind of familiar with that, older kind of look and feel, that older style. And so when we kind of said, hey, we're kind of thinking maybe more of the original style, or that original cartoon look with that, thick black line. And they were all about it. They were like, yes, let's do that. That feels right. And that feels like it's going to kind of create the perfect environment. So I think that was maybe a little surprising, but I'm super glad that's the direction that we were able to go.
That was something I was definitely curious about, because like you said, it's been over 50 years. There's been so many iterations. We mentioned Pup earlier. There's the Be Cool Scooby-Doo. There's the Mystery Incorporated version. There's the Scrappy years.
Yes.
And
polarizing Scrappy years.
I mean, there's a certain aspect of it where you do it is the original and it is sort of the baseline. So I wasn't surprised that you guys went with the classic kind of Where Are You models and structuring it around kind of like a classic episode. But I was kind of curious, by not choosing any of those other things, was there ever a temptation? Because like you said, you had, the Scrappy case on the side. Yes. Was there a temptation to have a section of the exhibit that was sort of not exclusively, but just sort of more focused on sort of the franchise as a whole, the half century of Scooby?
I think in any project that we create, there's always temptation to include everything and anything that you possibly can, because you want, you're like, oh, there's so much information. I want to tell people everything there is to know about this topic. And so part of the thing that we really have to do as a team goes back to that big idea that we create. We really have to create some focus for ourselves and give ourselves some parameters to work within, because otherwise, there would have been, maybe there would have been a pup named Scooby-Doo section, and there would have been a new Scoob section about the movie, and something else related to, I don't know, Be Cool Scooby-Doo. And when that happens, things can sometimes just get a little unwieldy and confusing, and people don't know where to focus, or they don't know what point you're trying to make. And so part of my job that can be really hard is reining it in and giving it that focus, so that there is a storyline to follow, that people kind of understand the story that you're trying to tell. And, so we added some things in about the history, but in a way that made sense to the story that we were telling, and to a way that kind of enhanced the story and didn't take away from it. So a great example is in the kitchen area where, Shaggy and Scooby have gone to. Well, kitchens have lots of cabinets, right? So we decided, hey, in some of these cabinets, we can put some memorabilia on display. We can kind of highlight some of that history. So we did like a display of lunch boxes, right? We had like lunch boxes dating back to like, the 60s all the way to today. And that kind of hints at that, lasting legacy, that over 50-year history, but in a way that integrates itself nicely into the environment, instead of like, oh, we're going to do a timeline of, lunch boxes or memorabilia over here on the wall, which then maybe doesn't add anything to the story that you're trying to tell. So it's a balancing act. It's hard, but that's part of what our job is as an exhibit team, is to figure out, what's really important about the story that we want to tell. What do we want people to take away?
Is there any aspect of that where you're like, maybe for the next exhibit?
All the time. Every time. I could probably do 5 more Scooby-Doo exhibits. There's enough content there that,
definitely. There definitely is. Yeah. You mentioned this, the artifacts from Warner Brothers should just qualify that because they were on loan from Warner Brothers, other exhibits can actually get material from Warner Brothers, but they have to request them specifically themselves. It's not technically a part of the exhibit.
Correct.
But I'm very curious, the process of choosing those artifacts, because was there a limit? Was it limited by space? Was it limited by Warner Brothers? Because I
Okay,
know
so
it
that's
would
a
be
great question.
so hard for me.
Yes, no, that's a great question. And so the way that whole process worked, so again, this was during COVID, right? So we didn't have permission to travel as museum staff. So there probably are times where if we were doing that, we would actually travel to like Warner Brothers archives and go tour and look and see what they have. But, since this was during COVID, the way that it worked out is, Warner Brothers knew the story that we were telling and kind of like what we were focusing on. And so their team at Warner Brother Archives, went and said, okay, let's see what we have that's available, that's not on loan somewhere else or on display somewhere else. And they kind of put together a package. They had taken a bunch of pictures of what they had and put together a package for us of like, here are the things that we could loan to you, that we think help kind of fit in with your story. And then we, looked at that list. And then the point you made, are you limited by size? Well, yes. Yeah. We're limited by, size and space and where we can put things in, what cases we have available that, will hold different artifacts. And so we kind of took that list and then kind of looked through and said, okay, which of these pieces are really going to tell our story the best? So I think number one was we need a mystery machine. We were like, we got to have a mystery machine. It's iconic. We want people to feel like when they walk into that exhibit, the gang has arrived. They're here. They need to see the van parked right there at the front of the exhibit. So that was probably number one on our list. And then we were really drawn to some of that initial concept art, character concepts, the show pitch board. We had at the Children's Museum on display the kind of the pitch board that sold Scooby-Doo to the CBS network. Those were the things that we felt like really tied into those intergenerational moments, like looking back all the way to the beginning of the franchise to where they started. These are kind of those powerful pieces that show the beginning of this long-lasting brand. And we think that people would really be drawn to these. And so that's kind of how we started to narrow down the selection and figure out what we were going to include. It's always a difficult process, but yeah, limited by space, limited by the story you're telling. But in the end, I think we were really happy with the pieces we were able to have on loan from WB Archives. And it kind of also, I think, like you said, other museums can choose if they, want to, arrange for those loans at their venue, they can. But it was something that kind of made it special, the opening special, right? Like, hey, these things are here at this venue. And we kind of felt like it kind of helped give it a little bit of enhancement for, that kind of opening moment.
I just wanted to be sort of self-conscious of talking about the archive pieces. And if somebody's like, oh, I want to go see the archive pieces, and then they're not there.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes. Unfortunately, you won't, I don't think that I haven't heard of any of the other museums kind of looking into those yet. So as far as I know, it's just, they're not going to be included in any of the other venues.
I think, does the Michigan exhibit not have the mystery machine?
Michigan has the mystery machine, and I don't know if Waco is getting the mystery machine. I
actually have their Facebook
I can't say that they're
page
going to get it because I'm not sure. It's if they have it, it'll be a nice surprise.
Yeah, I don't see it on their Facebook page, so
yeah.
Can't say for sure, but definitely if that's kind of like a drawing point for guests, something to look into before you go, check the websites and find out what's there, or call your venue. So traveling exhibit, the exhibit's created by you at the Children's Museum. You do so knowing that it's probably or possibly going to be a traveling exhibit. That's always the potential, right? Is that part of the thinking in putting it together where you're like, we need to be able to tear this down and set it up in a certain amount of time, and it needs to be able to travel? And I guess what's the thinking there? And I got a couple more questions about traveling, which I'll save for when you finish that, so I'm not just flooding your brain with stuff.
Sure. So yes, it is. And it definitely, if an exhibit's going to travel, we have to know by kind of that schematic design phase, because that's when we're starting to look at the exhibit in space. Our designers are figuring out how are these pieces going to come together. And we build traveling exhibits very different than we would build like a permanent exhibit that's going to be in one place and set up for a super long time. So yeah, they're looking at things like, how do these walls go together and come apart? How do they break down so that they can fit inside of crates that can fit inside of semi-trucks that can then, drive all over the country to the next venue? How are things getting applied to the walls? Like graphics, in ways that they can kind of be removed and safely packed for shipping and then put back up. So that's definitely a big lift and a big part of what our designers, our 3D designers are looking at when they're kind of creating those detailed drawings and models and kind of construction drawings for pieces. How's it going to come apart? How's it going to go back together? And how can we do it in like the easiest way possible so that it's fast?
So you've got, between the Children's Museum and Michigan, how long was it? Was
So
it a
we
couple months?
closed in January, and I'm trying to think when they opened. Did they open in February?
I think it was February, because I'm
think
thinking in terms
February,
of like the Michigan exhibit closing on the 9th and the Waco exhibit, the Texas exhibit opening on the 22nd, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a tight schedule.
It is.
So I
It's
was really
fast and
curious.
furious.
I was curious what your teardown time and setup time is.
I'm pretty sure teardown is somewhere around a week's worth of time. I think maybe we spent a little bit longer tearing down at the Children's Museum since we were the first, we were the first venue to show. We just kind of like verify that everything fit inside of the crates and was
Yeah.
getting packed the way we thought it would. But yeah, typically about a week for teardown. And then I believe it's about a 2-week setup, a 2-week install time period. And that will usually be a combination. So we have traveling exhibit technicians. And so we send one with the exhibit wherever it goes. And they're kind of there as like the lead, person from the Children's Museum to say, this is kind of how things go together, to troubleshoot, to problem solve. But then the host venue will usually provide like additional technicians to help set up and put everything together.
Do you travel to that first venue?
I do not. I don't. They don't put me on the road. They keep me in the office, typing
enough.
away, writing all the words for the next exhibit. But I do know the individuals that travel. So Sarah Myers, our director of traveling exhibits and project manager, she occasionally travels. And we have actually 3 different technicians that travel. So John Rothenbuehler, who's kind of our lead in traveling exhibits, and he also does some of our sales and venue agreements. He'll sometimes go, and then we have 2 technicians, Landon Krause and Ian Sigley. They're awesome, and they travel and get things set up and make sure they're all in working order. And I always hear back from them after they've come from a venue like, oh yeah, install was great, it went well, or yeah, we, something got a little jostled in shipping. So we had to kind of, fix it up when we got there. But
Have you heard any feedback from the Dearborn exhibit?
I haven't heard a ton directly, but I've just seen, continue just people really excited about it, positive reviews that it's interactive, it's fun, it's hands-on, that they were, excited to host. So I think so far, so good.
In a situation like this where you're partnering with somebody, this isn't the word that I want to use, but when it does leave your venue, who kind of has like ownership of it? Is it still essentially a Children's Museum exhibit, or is it a WB traveling exhibit at that point? Or is it both?
I think it's both. So, all of the kind of branding and, legal credit lines on the exhibit, I think say, like produced by the Children's Museum of Indianapolis in partnership with, Warner Brothers Animation Studios, or however they, have themselves credited. So it definitely still is a Children's Museum exhibit. And our name is on that exhibit saying, we're the ones that produced this. We built it. It was in partnership with Warner Brothers, but it's definitely still kind of remains ours. And we kind of control. So Sarah Myers, our director of traveling exhibits, she kind of is the one that is, arranging venues, signing agreements. So that kind of all goes through us. It doesn't go through WB. We're the ones that are,
They're contacting you. if
making
they're
the schedule.
interested.
Yeah, they're contacting us. We're the one making the schedule, telling them when it's available, renting it to them, making sure like shipping is arranged. All of that kind of goes through us.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, looking at the schedule, there are, I believe, 5 confirmed dates. I think there's 2 pending. One of those 5 might actually include the Waco, Texas date, but those dates are going into, I think, summer of 2025. How long could this conceivably travel?
Our traveling exhibits are usually travel for 5 years. So 5 years is kind of the typical lifespan. At the end of that 5 years, sometimes we'll kind of look at our agreement, like our licensing agreement with our brand, and say, hey, this is still super popular. People love it. Should we re-up the license, have it travel for a few more years? Or, if we're kind of like, okay, yeah, the exhibit's run its course, people have seen it, then we would, retire it. But it should be on the road for at least 5 years. So there's still there's still plenty of time.
As long as
There's
the
still
venues
more
keep
venues to
asking, that's the
come.
window.
Yes.
Would there be a temptation if, say, your 5 years is coming up and it's still popular? Would you consider reimagining the exhibit, like tweaking it and making something new?
There's always potential for that. It always just comes down to kind of, what else we have going on at the time, or, what's going on with the brand. Like if they've made some big shifts or changes and, they may say, hey, we want to keep this going, but we should really look at this or make sure that it's matching up with kind of like our new vision for what might be coming. I think there's always that possibility, but oftentimes the product that's out there, so much work and effort and love has gone into it that, a lot of times we kind of all feel really good about it. And so it's more of just, has the exhibit hold up? Have those millions of people that have, gone through it and touched and played with it, like, has it survived the test of time? Is it still in good shape where it can handle some more, or is it, is it ready to retire?
And I do realize, like, asking you that question, I mean, it's not like everybody at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is just sitting there watching the Scooby-Doo exhibit travel the US and being like, when's the next thing that we can do, a Scooby thing? You've got other things going on. This has flown the nest. It is now out in the world and doing its thing.
It is, right, yes.
But I know fans, they love the thing that they love and they want as much of it as they can get. So gotta ask the question.
Yeah. You never know. Check back. Keep your eyes on the website.
And speaking of everybody at the Children's Museum doing other things, what is going on now at the Children's Museum? What is Stephanie Eddleman working on right now that she can share? Is there anything you want to mention and get people excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so a couple things. Just like our museum creates exhibits, sends them out in the world, they travel, they go to different venues. A lot of other museums have traveling exhibits that we sometimes bring into our museum. And right now we have a traveling exhibit from MoPop, which is the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, that is all about Minecraft, which is, a huge hit with that kind of, 5 to 12 age range. It's been a huge hit for spring break. So that's been really fun. And then the next project that I'm working on that has been announced, so I can share, in the winter, so in November of this upcoming year, we are kind of reimagining our holiday experience. So for 20 years, we had an exhibit called Jolly Days. It was like our winter holiday, Christmas break kind of exhibit that came back every single season. And so after 20 years, it was kind of like, it was time to maybe put that aside and do something new. And so I have been the developer on our new winter annual seasonal exhibit. It's called Winter Fair, and it's all about kind of magic and whimsy and delight. And so you're kind of invited for you and your family to kind of walk into this magical, mystical winter forest where, animals come to life and they talk to you, and they have this really fun little carnival fair environment set up that has, winter twist. And so you can play favorite carnival games, all kind of given, a new winter look and feel, like skee ball, but instead of skee balls, they're like ice balls that you're throwing, and an ice cavern to explore, and a little artisans corner kind of, modeled after. We have like state fairs where they do these like 4-H shows and people kind of show off their crafts and different things that they've created. So we've kind of taken that as inspiration. And so that's going to be opening in November. And so we're in production on that project right now, and it's super fun and exciting, and I can't wait for it to open. I think families are going to be, I hope families are going to be really excited and enjoy it. And then I have a couple of other projects that I'm working on that are not announced yet, but they are going to be really exciting. They may involve some international travel, so there's fun things to look forward to. We always have something new and exciting and big coming to the Children's Museum. So if anyone who's listening ever gets the chance to come out to Indianapolis, we would love to have you visit us and come check us out.
So is Winter Fair going to be the first exhibit post Scooby for you that will open, or have you had anything in between?
No, it's not. I've had a couple of exhibits open since Scooby. So since Scooby has opened, I have done an exhibit called Power Play. It's an exhibit about hockey, and it was done in partnership with our local hockey team here in Indianapolis. They're not an NHL team, they're a farm team for the NHL. They're called the Indianapolis Fuel. So we did an exhibit with them that was all about hockey fan culture, and then also like the skills that you need to have to play hockey. So there's some really fun interactives where you get to try to shoot a virtual goal against a goalie and try to like balance, like see what it's like to balance on ice skates, and even do some sock skating. So that was a fun project that I've been working on. I feel like there's one other that I've done, and now we reopened our Dinosphere exhibit. We kind of did some updates to it, and I got to work on a portion of it called the Dinosphere Art Lab. And so it looked at paleo art and how paleo art kind of helps illustrate what we think we know about dinosaurs. And so I got to do some really fun work in creating different art activities to let kids become paleo artists themselves and see what it's like to kind of illustrate dinosaurs, to draw them, to sculpt them, to kind of imagine what they might have looked like. So that's been another fun project.
Nice. It's funny, you mentioned the whole thing about you send exhibits out, but then exhibits also come to you. And I've always thought of them in terms of just a guest. I've never thought of them in terms of you spend all this time developing this thing and you send it out, and somebody somewhere else has spent all this time developing something and they send it out. So it's kind of like, look what we made. And it's like, cool, look what we made.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And you get to kind of like experience other people's work and see what they're doing and how they're innovating and doing
it
all that
always
stuff.
gives us ideas too. I
Yeah.
kind of love when the travelers come in, because you always get new ideas like, oh, look what they did here, how they kind of thought about this. We should try that sometime.
That's going to be in the back of my head the next time I'm at an interactive exhibit here at our Science Center.
Love it.
I've had you on for a really long time. You've been so generous with your time. I'm going to call her quits here.
Okay.
But is there any social media or anything for yourself or for the Children's Museum that you want to drop? Or
Oh, yeah. So you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Children's Museum, Twitter as well, Children's Museum on Twitter. If you'd like to follow me, I am Eddleman on Instagram. It's Hebdleman. So you can follow me on Instagram. Sometimes I post fun things about exhibits that are coming up. So you can sometimes get a sneak peek of what I'm doing. But to be honest, it's just a lot of pictures of my kids. So it might not be that interesting.
I haven't had a chance to visit myself. Obviously, as I said, I'm living in Canada. But everything that I've heard about the exhibit from anybody I've talked to has been nothing but glowing praise. So thank you and congratulations on behalf of Scooby fans everywhere for all the work that you and your team did, because people are loving it.
Well, awesome. And yeah, and if you ever make it out to Indy, you can come check us out, or I don't know, maybe you should head down to Texas. I think it's probably better weather than Canada or Indiana at this point. So
Well, I'm definitely going to keep my eyes out for the Scooby exhibit, but I am actually kind of really excited about everything that you've kind of talked about with Children's Museum in Indianapolis. I'm fascinated, and I love venues, especially venues that are of that size, who are able to continue to produce content and to service a community and, tell your stories and do all the fun stuff. There isn't as much of that around as a lot of us would probably like in the world for various reasons. So the fact that you guys are there and doing your thing is a wonderful thing. So cool. Thank you so much for your time, Stephanie. All the best in your future exhibits, and anybody who is curious about anything that we've talked about, all of this stuff is out in the world. Go hunt it down. Yeah.
And thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time. I love getting to talk about the work that I do. So thanks for having me on.
And there you have it. That concludes my conversation with Scooby-Doo Mansion Mayhem exhibit developer for the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, Stephanie Eddleman. If you enjoyed my chat with Stephanie and want to know more, check out all the socials that she outlined at the end of the chat. Also, if there are any facilities, science centers, museums in your vicinity that have hosted, are hosting, or will be hosting the Mansion Mayhem exhibit, I'd recommend checking out their socials and following them as well, just to keep apprised of where it is, where it's going, The Children's Museum of Indianapolis website has a rough breakdown schedule of where the exhibit will be appearing across the U.S. As previously stated in the conversation, as of the 22nd of April, it will be at the Mayborn Museum Complex in Waco, Texas. In fall of 2023, it moves to the Magic House in St. Louis, Missouri. In spring of 2024, the Impression 5 Science Center in Lansing, Michigan. In summer of 2024, Golisano Children's Museum of Naples in Naples, Florida. In fall of 2024, the Museum of Discovery and Science in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. In spring of 2025, The Strong, Rochester, New York. Summer of 2025 is the Children's Museum of Atlanta in Atlanta, Georgia. And the fall 2025 slot is still available. Since the last time I've checked this, there's actually been a few slots filled, so that's actually exciting news. And, fingers crossed that this makes it somewhere Canadian. That would be really cool for all of us north of the 49th parallel who would be keen to check this out, and maybe international travel is not currently in the cards for them. Anyways, I'd love to know what you thought of this conversation, the podcast in general. Hit me up on my socials and give me a shout. I'm on Twitter at ScoobyDooCast, on Instagram and Facebook as a podcast named ScoobyDoo. And there is also the show blog at scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. I don't post there often, but there is some exclusive and unique content on the blog, such as some added value content that is attached to interviews that I've done for the podcast, for the Apocalypse Variations, some script pages, some concept art, stuff like that. And there's also the text versions of the Apocalypse Variations. I think there's 4 or 5 of those interviews that are available there as well. So if you're curious and haven't checked them out yet, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. Have fun. If you want to support the show on the social platforms, like, share, follow, subscribe, whatever option is being provided to you on the platform that you partake in. Also, you can rate and review the show on Apple's podcasts, Spotify. Any rating and review, it helps with the algorithms. So if you are enjoying the show and you want to kind of help give a little boost, get the show into the eyes and ears of people who may not know that this content is out there, but you think they may enjoy it, it's a big help. So I'd appreciate it if you took the time to do so. That's about all I have for this time around with the podcast. As I said before, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stephanie. I am hoping to actually have another episode out fairly quickly, so watch for that. This episode very specifically was meant to coincide with the opening of the Waco, Texas exhibit, but I did also want to have a traditional episode release for the show, and as I'm a little bit behind on my release schedule for 2023, I figured, what the heck? 2 episodes in April, make it happen. Plus, I've got some fun stuff planned for May, so look forward to that. And just keep your eyes and ears to the social media. That's where all the news drops. Or you already subscribe to the podcast, you don't miss an episode, and this is all kind of redundant. So with that, I will take my leave of you. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. I hope everybody is safe, happy, and healthy, and I will see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.